Imagine stepping into a dimly lit hall where time itself seems to pause and the air is charged with questions no one has yet unraveled. This is where our journey begins. I invite you to let your gaze wander over ancient maps showing continents once alive with peoples now forgotten. Picture a grid of straight, wide streets, brick houses all roughly the same size, an underground drainage system that many modern cities would envy. The narrative here shifts. No more peaceful and orderly districts, but palaces flanked by reliefs of armed kings and rows of captives, a power legitimized by force. Here, amid tangled roots and towering trees, the pyramids of Tikal and Calakmul still hide. Who has not seen, at least in photographs, the stone colossi, the Moai, gazing inland? Yet instead of lingering on the better-known pharaonic dynasties, we turn our gaze northward to the eastern Mediterranean basin, where the enigmatic sea peoples shook the late Bronze Age order. Don't be fooled by the vague label. These groups, ancestors perhaps of the Philistines, made an entire political world tremble. Cuneiform tablets describe waves of raids leveling fortified cities within weeks. Suddenly, balances thought eternal waver. Ugarit is razed, Hatti falls, even Egypt totters under Ramses III, who holds only at enormous cost. The central theme here is the interconnected network. The Bronze Age cities were bound by exchanges of metal, grain, and labor. When one node fell, the shock rippled through all the rest. If that sounds familiar, it's because today's globalization works similarly, and when a critical area falters, systemic fragility can spread faster than the capacity to respond. There were once palm forests so tall that canoes sailed the seas, carrying resources and ideas. Then the trees disappeared. The leading theory says the need for rollers to transport and erect the Moai drove deforestation, setting off a domino effect. Without trees, farmland degraded, coastal fishing dwindled, nets needed plant fibers, and clans fought over the scraps that remained. Rapa Nui is an isolated micro-experiment showing how culture can unwittingly push nature past the point of no return. No external catastrophe, a human action amplified by a social system that rewarded symbolic competition. To what extent, we wonder, do modern cultures also invest energy in metaphorical moai at the expense of what sustains them? The Maya were refined astronomers. They calculated eclipses, the cycle of Venus, even the synodic rotation of Mars with precision. Everything in the sky had a reflection on Earth, and vice versa. Yet around the 8th century CE, the city-states stopped erecting commemorative stelae. Royal palaces were swallowed by vegetation, maize fields left to themselves. Excessive deforestation to sustain population growth, a decades-long drought recorded in tree rings, internal revolts against the priestly elite. Once again, no single cause suffices. It is as though the complexity of their own success produced multiple vulnerabilities, and when enough factors combined, the effort to adapt exceeded resilience. The lesson: diversify sources of sustenance and respect natural limits, or risk sliding from slow decline into sudden collapse. The Assyrian Empire expanded in mere decades thanks to a frighteningly efficient army, yet collapsed just as quickly when coalitions of subjugated peoples rose up. The paradox is clear. The moment of maximum territorial reach coincides with the point at which borders become unmanageable. We might call this the imperial sustainability limit. Beyond a certain threshold, the effort to maintain unity outweighs the gains. This warns us that unlimited growth is a seductive ideal, but over time, unsustainable. The echo resonates today, when large multinational organizations face crises caused as much by internal complexity as by external pressures. Archaeologists have uncovered standardized weights, seals bearing unicorns and bulls, even pots whose red clay is polished as though it were metal. Yet when the dust of time settles on these stones, we realize we lack the voices of those who lived here. We have not deciphered their script, and we do not know why, over a few centuries, those meticulous streets were deserted. Floods, tectonic shifts that diverted waterways, perhaps crop failures have all been suggested. One detail stands out: the absence of fortifications. These cities seem built on cooperation rather than war. A question arises: can a society thrive without walls if environmental or political pressures mount? Perhaps one seed of their ending was the very trust that made them great. To brush, if only in thought, stones that speak of gods and stars of far-flung trade and thriving cities that suddenly fell silent. Why give attention to these stories? Because when a civilization vanishes, it is not merely a people who disappear. An entire way of thinking, a whole system of knowledge, myths, and hopes slips into the dark. And if we could understand more clearly the reasons behind those gaps in humanity's timeline, perhaps we would recognize in time the signals that announce similar fragilities in today's societies. With curiosity alight and a spirit ready to be astonished, let's set off. The first footprints we follow lead us along the banks of the Indus River, where the Harappan civilization blossomed. Now we move to the highlands of northern Mesopotamia, where the Cyclopean walls of Assur once stood. Let's leave the scorching deserts behind and venture into the rainforests of Central America. We cross the Pacific and land on Rapa Nui, known to many as Easter Island. Almost without noticing, we drift back to Egypt's sands. Let's tiptoe into the second movement of our tale without breaking the flow of thought. Picture the wind blowing across Bolivia's high plains, ruffling Lake Titicaca's waters. Here stood Tiwanaku, with its gateway of the sun, monoliths, and ceremonial platforms aligned to the equinoxes. I don't mean to hunt physical proof of Plato's island. Instead, let's treat it as the archetype of a perfect city wiped out by cataclysm. These temples, raised some 12 millennia ago, before large-scale farming, force a paradigm shift. It wasn't tea agriculture creating the surplus for rights. Here, among salty deserts and oasis greenery, flourished a refined art. Statuettes depict deities with wide lapis lazuli eyes. What unites these tales is not the end itself. It is humanity's resilience in retaining them, drawing warnings, dreaming new beginnings. Look at our cities glowing from space at night, constellations not so different from ancient tribal fires. What keeps us from repeating the same mistakes? Nothing, save awareness. That is why Harappa, Assur, the Maya, Rapa Nui, and all the others are worth remembering. Each offers a mosaic of causes and consequences, alarm signals, and hope. And so, before we part, I leave you with this thought. Every civilization, including our own, walks a tightrope stretched between innovation and fragility. Knowing those that came before is no mere exercise in nostalgia, but an act of foresight. Thank you for journeying with me through the folds of time. Carry these stories like lanterns, that they may light the path of questions still waiting for answers. Indo-Iranian and Mesopotamian influences intertwined in a cosmopolitan culture. Then, around the 3 millennium BCE, the settlements were abandoned. The leading explanation is a shift in the rivers that fed the oases. Without water, not even the grandest temple can survive. The thread comes full circle. The balance between humans and environment is as delicate as it is essential. But the need to gather for rights that pushed humans to domesticate nature systematically. Yet after thousands of years in use, the temples were deliberately buried, as though the community chose to entomb its own sacred past. Why? Perhaps a religious shift, perhaps the end of a broad trade network. The gesture tells us that sometimes a culture's disappearance is not an external disaster, but an internal decision, almost a cultural reset clearing space for a new identity. Atlantis embodies the fear that even at the height of art and science, pride invites the gods' punishment, or in modern language, the ecosystems. The myth has crossed centuries and still inspires novels, films, even pseudo-scientific theories. Whether Atlantis existed is beside the point. The message is clear. Every society must balance ambition and caution. Lose respect for limits, and the metaphor of a continent sinking into the abyss may turn all too real. Scholars speak of intensive farming on raised fields that manage temperature and moisture with astonishing sophistication. Tiwanaku did not fall to sudden assault, but was worn down by long climate instability. Shifting rainfall patterns made cultivation unsustainable, and the sacred city lost prestige. A psychological element now enters. When the ritual center can no longer guarantee fertility, people question its authority. If a system's legitimacy depends on the ability to deliver tangible prosperity, what happens when that prosperity wavers? The question echoes in how trust in today's economic and political institutions rises or falls with perceived well-being. We cross the Atlantic to West Africa, where the ancient kingdom of Ghana, with capital Kumbi-Saleh, controlled the gold and salt routes. Power here was measured not only in wealth, but in mastery of caravan lines. Yet when internal mines waned and new routes bypassed their territory, the commercial center shifted. Nomadic populations pressed the borders. Islamic faith supplanted traditional cults, eroding the monarchy's ideological base. Ghana splintered into myriad smaller realms. This episode shows how technology, in this case new camel routes, and ideology, the spread of a universal religion, can conspire to redraw equilibria, leaving behind the mirage of a vanished greatness. Now let myth's strings vibrate as we delve into ancient Atlantis. As the virtual sun of our story begins to set, we cast an eye toward the stone face of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Anatolia. Finally, we reach the legendary Bactria Margiana civilization in what is now Turkmenistan and northern Afghanistan. At this point, our journey's circle closes. We have followed stories of growth and dimming, of extraordinary achievements and sudden eclipses,